The crisp autumn morning wrapped the forest in a gentle mist as Tom made his way through the familiar hunting trails. He'd been coming to these woods for 15 years, now knowing every creek and ridge like the back of his hand. The fallen leaves crunched softly under his boots as he tracked what looked like fresh deer prints in the morning dew. The sun was just starting to peek through the dense canopy of oak and maple trees, creating dancing patterns on the forest floor. Tom adjusted his orange safety vest and gripped his rifle a little tighter, staying alert for any movement in the undergrowth. He'd learned long ago that patience was the key to a successful hunt, but this morning felt different somehow. The usual peaceful silence of the woods was broken by something he couldn't quite place. Tom stopped in his tracks, holding his breath to listen more carefully. There it was, again a faint whimpering sound carried on the breeze, definitely not from any deer he'd ever encountered. His hunter's instincts keyed in, but instead of following deer tracks, he found himself drawn to that mysterious sound. It seemed to be coming from somewhere near the old lightning-struck oak that marked the boundary of his usual hunting grounds. As he moved closer, the whimpering became clearer, mixed with the rattling of what sounded like chain or rope against wood. "Hello," Tom called out softly, not wanting to startle whatever was making those pitiful sounds. The whimpering stopped for a moment, replaced by a weak bark that made his heart can't skip a beat. He quickened his pace, pushing through a thick patch of brambles that caught at his clothes when he finally reached the old oak tray. What he saw made him forget all about his morning hunt. There, tied to the massive trunk with frayed rope, was a German shepherd. The dog's ribs showed through its matted fur, and its eyes, though alert, spoke of exhaustion and hunger. Tom's throat tightened. He'd seen plenty of abandoned animals before, but something about this one felt different. The dog watched him cautiously, but didn't show any signs of aggression. Tom slowly set his rifle down and held out his hand, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. "Hey there, buddy. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." To his surprise, the dog's tail gave a slight wag as if it somehow knew he was there to help. As he edged closer, Tom noticed something metallic glinting around the dog's neck. His first thought was that it might be an ID tag that could help him find the owner. But as he got near enough to see it clearly, his blood ran cold. It wasn't a regular dog tag at all. It was a military identification tag, the kind he hadn't seen since his own days in service. The dog allowed him to approach, and Tom's hands trembled slightly as he reached out to examine the tag. The morning sun caught the metal, and what he read there made him sit back on his heels in shock. This wasn't just any abandoned dog. This was a trained military working dog, and the name on that tag opened up a flood of memories he thought he'd left behind years ago. Tom looked into the dog's eyes again, seeing now what he missed at first glance, the intelligent, trained gaze of a service animal who would do this to you. He whispered, his mind already racing with questions. The rope around the tree was tied with a specific knot, one he recognized from his military days. This wasn't some random act of abandonment. Someone with military training had left this dog here. He reached into his hunting pack for his water bottle and the beef jerky he packed for lunch. The dog's ears perked up at the sound of the wrapper, but it maintained its disciplined position, waiting for permission. Another clear sign of its military training. "Here you go, buddy. You must be starving," Tom said softly, holding out small pieces of jerky in his palm as the dog ate and drank. Tom surveyed the area around the tree. There were signs of recent activity, cigarette butts that hadn't yet been rained on boot prints that still held their shape in the soft earth. His hunter's eye for detail now served a different purpose, as he pieced together the clues around him. The morning mist had begun to lift, and the forest was warming up, but Tom had completely forgotten about his planned hunt. He knew he had stumbled onto something much more important than tracking deer as he began working to untie the rope from the tree. His mind was already forming a plan. This wasn't just about rescuing an abandoned dog anymore. The military tag had turned this into something personal, something that connected to his own past in ways he never expected. When he set out that morning, the dog stood shakily as Tom finally freed it from the tree, staying close to his side, as if it had found a familiar comfort in his presence. Together, they looked out into the brightening forest, both knowing that this was just the beginning of a much bigger story. Tom patted the dog's head gently, making a silent promise to unravel the mystery of how a highly trained military dog ended up tied to a tree in his hunting grounds, and more importantly, to find out who was responsible with trembling fingers. Tom held the military dog tag closer to his eyes, wiping away the mud that had collected around its edges. The morning sun caught the metal, making the engraved letters shine clearly. His heart nearly stopped when he read the name Mike Sullivan. The memories came rushing back like a flood. Vivid images of hot desert days and long nights on patrol. Mike had been more than just another soldier in their unit. He was the guy who always carried extra water for everyone else, who could somehow find humor in their toughest moments. Tom remembered clearly the day Mike was assigned his military working dog, a young German shepherd named Thunder. The bond between them had been instant and unshakable. Thunder. Tom whispered, hardly daring to believe it. The dog's ears perked up immediately, and despite its weakened state, its tail gave a slight wag of recognition. Tom sat back on his heels, overwhelmed by the revelation. This wasn't just any military dog. This was Thunder, the same dog who had saved their unit from an ambush by detecting danger ahead of time. Tom reached out slowly, running his hand along Thunder's neck, checking for any injuries. The dog leaned into his touch, perhaps remembering the scent of someone who had once been part of his military family. "What happened, boy? Where's Mike?" The questions hung in the cool morning air, unanswered but heavy with concern. The last time Tun had seen Mike and Thunder was at their unit's medal ceremony 3 years ago. Thunder had received a special commendation for his service, and Mike had been beaming with pride. But after they all returned home, things had changed. Mike had struggled to adjust to civilian life. Like many of them had, the cheerful guy who always had a joke ready became quieter, more withdrawn. Tom pulled out his phone, his hands still shaking slightly as he scrolled R through old contacts. He still had Mike's number, though they hadn't spoken in over a year. The last time they talked, Mike had mentioned moving to a cabin somewhere in these woods, saying he needed space to clear his head. Tom had offered to visit, but Mike had politely declined, saying he wasn't ready for company. The call went straight to voicemail, Mike's cheerful greeting from happier times playing in Tom's ear. "Hey, buddy, it's me. I found Thunder in the woods. Call me back as soon as you can, okay? I'm worried about you both." His voice cracked slightly as he left the message, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Funda watched him intently as he made the call, the dog's intelligent eyes following his every move. Despite his obvious hunger and fatigue, Thunder maintained the alertness of his training, scanning their surroundings periodically, just as he had done on countless patrols. Tom pulled out his trail map, spreading it on a dry patch of ground. The old oak where he'd found Thunder was marked. It was one of his regular hunting landmarks. He began making notes, marking the location of the fresh boot prints and cigarette butts. He'd found something about those. Clues bothered him. The boots had left a distinctive pattern he recognized from their military days, and the cigarettes were the same brand Mike always smoked, taking care to document everything with his phone's camera. Tom noticed something else. There were other tracks in the area, older ones suggesting someone had been coming back to this spot. Repeatedly over the past few days, the thought of Thunder being tied up here while someone checked on him periodically made Tom's stomach turn. He pulled out his emergency kit, grateful now for his habit of over-preparing for hunting trips. Inside was a small first aid kit, some dried food and a collapsible water bowl. Thunder drank eagerly but carefully, showing the discipline of his training even in his weakened state, as the dog ate small bites of the trail. Nick's Tom offered memories of shared meals in the desert. Flooded back Thunder always waiting patiently for Mike's permission before eating. Mike always making sure his dog was cared for. Before tending to his own needs, the morning was warming up. Now the forest coming alive with bird songs and rustling leaves, but Tom barely noticed his mind racing with questions and possibilities. Why would Mike leave Thunder tied to a tree? The Mike he knew would never willingly abandon his partner. Something must have happened, something serious enough to make a decorated soldier act against everything he believed in. Standing up, Tom made a decision he couldn't just take Thunder and walk away. Not when every instinct told and his old friend was in trouble. Mike had always been there for their unit, never leaving anyone behind now. It was time to return that loyalty, but first he needed to get Thunder somewhere safe, somewhere he could recover his strength. "Come on, boy," Tom said softly. Patting his leg, Funda rose, shakily but obediently, falling into step beside him, just like he used to do with Mike as they made their way back through the forest. Tom's mind was already forming a plan. He would need help, the right kind of help from people who would understand the unique bond between a military handler and his dog. The mystery of how Thunder ended up tied to that tree and where Mike had gone weighed heavily on Tom's mind. But looking down at the brave dog walking steadily beside him, he felt a surge of hope. Thunder had found him for a reason, and together they would find Mike no matter what it took. The hunt he planned for today would have to wait. He had a much more important mission. Now the walk back to Tom's truck was slow and careful. Thunda moved steadily beside him, but Tom could see how the dog's legs trembled with each step every few minutes. They'd stop to rest, and Tom would offer small sips of water, careful not to let Thunder drink too much at once. His mind kept racing back to their training days, remembering how to care for working dogs in difficult condition. Eye conditions, the morning sun had risen higher now, warming the aught air as they walked. Tom kept scanning the forest around them. His hunter's instincts now focused on looking for any signs of recent human activity. Each snapped twig or disturbed patch of leaves could be a clue to Mike's whereabouts. Thunder seemed to pick up on his allness occasionally, lifting his nose to the air, though he was too weak to track properly. Just a little further, Buddy Tom encouraged as they approached another fallen log. He'd been talking softly to Thunder the whole way, partly to keep the dog's spirits up and partly to keep himself focused. The comfortable weight of his hunting rifle across his back was forgotten. Now this morning had turned into something far more important than tracking deer. Finally, they reached the small clearing where Tom had parked his truck. Funda hesitated for just a moment at the sight of the vehicle, but a gentle word from Tom was all it took to get him moving again. Tom opened the back door and pulled out the old blanket he kept there for hauling gear, creating a comfortable bed on the back seat. He helped Thunder climb in, noting how the dog immediately positioned himself to keep watch. Through the windows, old habits from his military training still showing through before starting the engine, T pulled out his phone again. Still, no call back from Mike. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Dr. Chen, the local vet who had helped rehabilitate other rescue animals. Tom had found over the years the phone rang twice before her friendly voice answered Jenny. "It's Tom. Listen, I've got an emergency case here, found a military working dog tied up in the woods. He's dehydrated and undernourished, but stable any chance you could see him right away." Tom's voice stayed steady, but his fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel as he waited for her response. The drive to the veterinary clinic took 20 minutes, during which Tom divided his attention between the road ahead and checking on Thunder in his rearview mirror. The dog remained alert, but calm, occasionally making eye contact with Tom in the mirror. There was something haunting about those intelligent eyes, as if Thunder was trying to tell him something important about Mike Dr. Chen was waiting outside when they pulled up her face, showing professional concern rather than alarm. Exactly what Tom needed to see right now. She approached the truck, slowly giving Thunder time to see and assess her. "Hey there, handsome." She said softly. As Tom helped Thunder out of the back seat, the dog's military training showed again, as he allowed her to approach, maintaining his composure, despite being in an unfamiliar situation inside the clinic. Dr. Chen's examination was gentle, but thorough. Tom stood nearby, one hand resting lightly on Thunder's head, offering quiet reassurance. He explained everything he knew about the situation, showing her the military tag and describing the condition of the area where he'd found Thunder. Well, the good news is that while he's definitely undernourished and dehydrated, I don't see any serious injuries, Dr. Chen said finally. Running her hand along Thunder's ribs, I'd estimate he's been without proper care for about 2 weeks. But someone was giving him at least some water. During that time, he's a fighter. His military training probably helped him stay strong, as Dr. Chen prepared to set up an IV for fluids. Tom noticed something interesting. There was a small notebook in Fun's collar, tucked into a hidden pocket. The kind of detail you'd only notice during a careful examination with gentle fingers. He worked it free. The pages were mostly blank, but on the first page there was a short note written in handwriting. He recognized immediately as Mek Funda. "Knows the way. I'm sorry I couldn't take care of him. Any more, please help him find someone who can." Tom's throat tightened as he read the words. The note confirmed his worst fears. Mike was in trouble. Deeper trouble than any of them had realized. The handwriting was shaky. Nothing like Mike's usual neat script, but why leave Thunder tied to that specific tree? And why leave a note that explained so little while saying so much? Dr. Chen noticed his expression as she returned with the IV supplies. "There's more to this story, isn't there?" she asked, quietly, beginning to set up the fluid line. Tom nodded, sharing the note with her. Her eyes softened with understanding as she read it too, to look for him. "Aren't you have to?" Tom replied, simply, "Mike and Thunder. They saved our lives more than once overseas. I can't just walk away now." He watched as Thunder accepted the IV needle without flinching, still showing the incredible discipline of his training. "But first, we need to get this boy back to full strength. He might be the key to finding." Mike Dr. Chen nodded her experienced hands, checking the IV flow. "He can stay here for observation. I make sure he gets the proper care and rebuilds his strength. But Tom," she caught his eye, "whatever is going on with your friend, be careful. Someone who would leave their military dog tied to a tree. They might not be thinking clearly." Tom understood what she wasn't saying directly. He'd seen enough veterans struggle with the transition home to know that sometimes the toughest battles happened long after leaving the combat zone. As he sat down beside Thunder, gently stroking the dog's head while the fluids did their work, he began to piece together a plan. He'd need help, the right kind of help, to find Mike and understand what had led to this moment. While Thund rested at Dr. Chen's clinic, Tom sat in his truck in the parking lot, making calls. His first call was to Bob, the local sheriff who'd served in the Navy years ago. Tom knew he'd understand the significance of a military working dog being abandoned. "I know, Mike," Bob said. After Tom explained the situation, he bought old Pete's Sin up by Cedar Creek about 6 months ago. Being pretty quiet, keeps to himself. Mostly. My deputies have tried to check on him a few times after some hikers reported strange noises, but he never answers the door. Tom's concern deepened any idea. When someone last saw him, local grocery store owner mentioned him coming in about 3 weeks ago, said he seemed different, bought a lot of dog food but couldn't still kept looking over his shoulder. Bob paused, and Tom could hear paper rustling. "Listen, I've got his cabin's address here, but Tom, if you're heading up there, I want to send one of my deputies with you. Thanks, but maybe that's not the best idea," Tom said carefully. "If Mike's struggling, seeing a uniform might make things worse. Let me try first. He knows me from our service days." The sheriff was quiet for a moment. "All right, but you call me the second you find anything. And Tom, be careful. Sometimes the people we serve with come back different after hanging up." Tom drove to the local D. He needed to think, and Betty's coffee had helped him solve many problems over the years. The bell above the door chimed as he walked in, and the familiar smell of coffee and pie wrapped around him like a warm blanket. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Betty said, already pouring his usual black coffee. She'd been serving veterans like him for 30 years, and she had a way of knowing when something was wrong. Tom wrapped his hands around the wall mark and told her everything. Finding Thunder, recognizing Mike's name, the worried calls from hikers. Betty listened without interrupting, occasionally topping off his coffee. "You know," she said finally, "my late husband came back different from Vietnam, wouldn't talk about it. Started staying up all night. The only thing that seemed to help was that old dog of his." She wiped her hands on her apron, thinking, "Mike's been coming in here." "Sometimes, real early, when nobody else is around. Always sits in the corner. Booth back to the wall. Orders. The same thing, eggs and toast, but mostly just pushes it around his plate." Tom pulled out his phone and showed her the note he found in Thunder's collar. Betty adjusted her reading glasses, frowning slightly. "Last time I saw Hen was maybe 2 weeks ago." He was writing in a notebook. Just like this one, kept apologizing to someone who wasn't there. The diner's door chimed again as a couple of regulars walked in. Betty gave Tom's shoulder a gentle pat before heading off to serve them. Tom sat there, piecing together everything he'd learned. Mike had been struggling that much. Was clear, but wily Thunder? Tied to that specific tree, and why leave a note that raised more questions than answers? Finishing his coffee, Ton decided his next stop would be Mike's cabin. He needed to see where his friend had been living. Look for any clues about where he might have gone, but first he wanted to check on Thunder again. Back at the vet clinic, he found Dr. Chen reviewing some test results. His blood work shows mild anemia and dehydration, but nothing we can't fix," she reported. "He's responding well to the fluids. What's amazing is his temperament. Despite everything he's been through, he's still so gentle and trusting." Thunder was resting on a thick blanket in one of the larger kennels when he saw Tom. His tail thumped weakly against the floor. Dr. Chen had cleaned him up, and without the mud and tangles, Tom could see more of the proud military dog he remembered. "Hey, buddy," Tom said softly, sitting down beside the cow. Thunder shifted closer to the gate, pressing his nose through the bars to touch Tom's hand. "We're going to find him. Okay, we're going to figure out what happened." Dr. Chen watched them for a moment. "You know, dogs like Thunder. They're special. They can sense things we can't understand, things we miss. Whatever's going on with your friend, I think Thunder might be the key to finding him." Taunt nodded, remembering how Thunder had always seemed to know when Mike was having a rough day even before Mike showed any signs. The bond between a handler and their military dog went deeper than most people could understand. "I need to check out his cabin," Tom told Dr. Chen. "Can Thunder stay here a bit longer?" "Of course. He needs at least another day of rest and monitoring. But Tom," she caught his eye, "when you find Mike, tell him there's help available. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is admit they need support." As Tom drove towards Cedar Creek, following Bob's directions to the cabin, his mind kept going back to their days in service. Mike had always been the strong one, the one who held them together during the worst times. But strength could be a double-edged sword. Sometimes it made it harder to admit when things became too much to handle. Alone, the autumn sun was starting to sink lower in the sky as Tom turned onto the narrow dirt road leading to Mike's cabin. He couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that somewhere in these woods his friend needed help, and this time it was Tom's turn to be the strong one. Mike's cabin sat at the end of a winding dirt road, half hidden by towering pine trees, as Tom pulled up in his truck. The first thing he noticed was how quiet everything was. No smoke from the chimney, no lights in the windows, just the sound of wind in the trees and distant birds. The cabin itself was smaller than Tom had imagined, its wooden walls weathered by sun and rain. Old Pete had built it 30 years ago, and it looked like it hadn't seen much maintenance since then. A stack of firewood lay scattered near the front door, as if someone had dropped it in a hurry. Tom approached carefully, noting details with his trained eye: recent tire tracks. In the month suggested someone had been here within the last few days. Empty food cans and water bottles filled a trash bag by the door, at least a week's worth. He guessed the cabin's windows were covered from the inside with what looked like old maps and newspaper pages. "Mike." He called out, knocking on the solid wooden door. No answer. He tried again, louder this time, only. Silence replied. The door wasn't locked, unusual for someone with military training. Tom K's concern deepened as he slowly pushed it open. The inside of the cabin told a story that made his heart ache. Military photos covered one wall, the unit in better days. Thunder receiving his service medal, Mike and Thunder on patrol, but it was the other walls that worried him. They were covered with handwritten notes, maps with circle locations, and strings connecting different points. Tom recognized it as the kind of pattern someone makes when they're trying to solve a puzzle. Only they can see empty coffee cups lit of the small table, along with a stack of unopened mail. Tom picked up one envelope, a letter from the VA hospital dated 3 weeks ago. More concerning were the scattered pill bottles, some prescribed for sleep, others for anxiety. Most were barely touched. Thunder's bed lay in the corner, the blanket still neatly folded. Mike's military precision showing even in how he cared for his dog. Beside it sat Thunder's favorite toy, a worn rubber ball they'd used in training. Tom picked it up, remembering how proud Mike had been when Thunder mastered each new command. A laptop sat open on the small desk. It screened dark when Tom pressed the power button. It came to life, showing a document Mike had been typing. Can't sleep again. The noises are getting louder. Funda tries to help, but I can't tell what's real anymore. He deserves better than this. Someone who can take care of him properly. I thought coming to the woods would help, but the shadows keep moving. I need to protect him from what's coming. I need to protect everyone. The date on the document was from 2 weeks ago. Tom sat heavily in the desk chair, running his hands through his hair. The Mike he knew would never abandon. Thunder unless something was seriously wrong. The cabin's walls sink close in around him, filled with evidence of his friend's struggling mind. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's windows. Tom started gathering things he thought might help Thunder toy some recent photos. Mike's notebook with his latest writings. As he moved through the small space, he noticed something odd about the maps on the walls. They all centered around one area. The old fire watchtower that hadn't been used in years. Tom pulled out his phone and called Bob the sheriff. "I'm at Mike's cabin," he said quietly, as if afraid to disturb the heavy silence. "He's not here, but I think I know where he might be. Can you get some people together? We need to search the area around the old watchtower." Bob understood immediately. "I'll call in some of the local veterans. They'll know how to handle this, right? Give me an hour to get everyone organized. We'll meet at the ranger station while waiting." Tom drove back to Dr. Chen's clinic to check on Thunder. The dog looked stronger already. Sitting up when Tom entered, Dr. Chen had good news. Thunder could be released, though he'd need regular meals and care to regain his full strength. "He keeps watching the door," Dr. Chen said softly. "I think in waiting for Mike, these military dogs, their loyalty runs deep." Tom showed her the ball from the cabin. Thunder's ears perked up immediately at the sight of it. "Think he's strong enough to help us search. He might be able to track Mike," sent Dr. Chen considered carefully. "His physical strength is returning, but don't push him too